Hello everyone, I'm going to be going over how to get started with our 3D puzzles using Godot. First step is to either import or create a project. In this case, we're going to create. I need to choose a location, and in this case, I have a games folder that I'm going to select, and I want to make sure I'm giving my project a name. From here, I can change the renderer if I want. There are different versions of the renderer optimized for different platforms. It'll automatically use the right renderer for the platform that you need, so it's not something that we need to change, though it is something you can change from the start if you need to. And I'm just going to hit create and edit. Alright, the workspace here should look a little bit similar to Blender. On the top left, we have what's called the scene tree, and this gives access to all of the assets in the current scene. You can think of it sort of like the outliner on the Blender side. Right below that, we have access to the file system so that we can see all the assets in the project as a whole. On the right, we have the inspector, which is like the properties panel in Blender, and there are a couple other tabs that we'll be using later on. In the middle, we have this view that changes between 2D for doing like a 2D platformer game, or if we're working with UI, 3D for working with what our 3D game actually looks like, a script tab for working on the scripting side of things, and then access to an asset library where we can import things. We're not actually going to need that for this. Alright, so I'm back over in the 3D view. Now, the first thing I want to do is just do a little organization to the project. So in the file system, I have this root folder called res, so that's where everything is located in the project. By default, all it has is a logo for Godot that it's going to use as the app icon unless we replace it with our own version. For now, I'm just going to leave that, and I'm just going to right click on that root folder, and I'm going to create a few different folders to work with. I'm going to create a folder for any materials. I'm going to create a folder for any scripts. And I'm going to create a folder for any scenes. At some point, I might come in and make some additional folders or move things around. If you do end up with something in the wrong place, you can just drag and drop to change the location. So nice and easy there. I also want to add my models folder, which you're going to download from Google Classroom. Let me know if you need any help with that. And when I drag it over, it'll take a moment to import because there's a few different models inside of it. So you can see we have a couple of different sets of puzzle pieces. So you can choose either set 1 or set 2 to work with, or you can work with both. Matter of personal preference. And so when you double click on the Blender model, it opens up this import window. And depending on what's going on, we might sometimes skip importing certain mesh objects inside the file. So if this one had a light or a camera that I don't want brought into my Godot scene, or there's another model that I forgot to remove, I can just select the object over here under scene and then check skip import to skip that entirely. You'll notice there's some other settings that I can mess around with, but usually all I need to do is either skip import if there are things I don't want to actually use from the file, and then also under actions, sometimes I like to extract the materials, and I'm just going to select the materials folder and extract that box material there, and then click on re-import. And I'm going to go through and do that process. Again, I only have the one model in most of my files, so I don't need to skip import on anything, but I do want to extract my materials to my materials folder so that I can edit them on the Godot side if that's something that I want to do. And so I can go through pretty quickly. Oh, wrong location. Now that I have my materials all available, I'm going to move on to work on my first scene. So Godot is made up of what they call nodes, and that's sort of the basic building block. You can think of the nodes kind of like Lego pieces. So you have all sorts of different types of Lego pieces that can be combined together to create different things. And so the first one that I want is going to be static body 3D. So if I just start searching for static, it's going to show up over here. There are several different nodes that can work with physics interactions. This particular node is intended for objects that aren't going to be moving. So box 2 over here, I think on the ones that the files that I've shared with you, I think this has been renamed to frame. I'm just going to drag this over my static body 3D from the file system. There we go. Again, control drag to zoom in and out. Now I have my static body, and this is a frame that the different puzzle pieces are going to be put into, and when they've been put in properly, you'll win the game. If they haven't been placed so that they all fit, you lose the game. Now, by itself, this isn't going to actually interact with anything. A static body node can be interacted with, but there's some additional setup that we need. Notice this little indicator right here. That is warning us that there is a problem. So if you tap on it, it tells you what the problem. There's not a shape, so it can't collide. So add a collision shape. So I'm going to click on my static body 3D, and actually I'm just going to take a moment to rename that. And I'm going to just call this my frame. And actually, I think I want all my names to be lowercase, so I'm just going to fix that really quick. Now, in this particular case, I want to have a collision shape that fits the mesh perfectly. So I want to expose the mesh object itself. So if I right-click on my Blender node and check Editable Children, now there's this mesh object that shows up. You can see it's recognized as a mesh instance 3D. There's this new mesh button that shows up. So if I click on the button here, I can create a collision shape. There are a few different options, but I'm just going to leave the default. Trimesh is going to create a mesh that fits the object perfectly. And if you have concave shapes, you will probably want Trimesh. So I'm going to click on Create. Now, the collider is in the wrong location. I just need to drag it over the parent node so that my static body is the parent, and both the mesh and the collider are siblings, and they're both children of the root node or the parent node. If I hide the mesh temporarily, I can see what the collider actually looks like. Now, you do want to be careful using the Trimesh Collider like I just created. This is something that should only be done for static bodies that aren't going to be moving. All right, so this is set up. That all looks fine. I don't think there are any settings that I need to change at this stage. So for now, I'm just going to save with Command S. I'm going to make sure to choose my scene folder as the location. I might do some further organizing later on, but for now I'm just going to save directly in scenes. And now I'm going to make my next scene. So Command N or File New. Now this time I'm going to be adding a scene for one of my puzzle pieces. I'm going to do plus other node, and this time I want a piece that's going to be able to move. So I want the animatable body 3D. Now, there are different types of physics body nodes that are used for different types of physics interactions. Now, this one is particularly good for puzzle pieces that we're controlling where they go. It's also really good for moving platforms, doors opening and closing, those sorts of things. But what happens is that these can collide with objects and other objects can collide with them, but other forces have absolutely no impact on the node itself. So I have this animatable body, completely doesn't respond to gravity. Other things hit it. They might stop because of that, but it's not going to impact the animatable body. So that's something that's actually pretty helpful. Now, I always like to name my nodes descriptively. So this is going to be for the corner piece. Notice I'm using an underscore instead of a space. And I'm just going to drag my corner blend model like that. Now, I cannot use the Trimesh Collider, so I have to create the collider in a different way. So I'm going to come over to corner piece over here. And actually, I'm going to make sure that I turn off sync to physics because I don't want the physics interaction interfering with the action that I code later on. The animatable body is going to be able to collide, but otherwise it's not going to be responding to physics. All right, so this time I'm going to add my own collider, and I'm actually going to need 2 for this particular shape. So I'm going to just right click, add child node. I'm going to search for collision shape 3D. I can double click to add it. Now we have another warning notification. There's not actually a shape right now. We need to create a shape. So over in the inspector next to shape, you can see it says empty. If you click on the little drop down, we can create a new box shape 3D. Now you may notice there's some transform settings. You don't want to change the scale here. You want to change them in the shape setting. So if I click on the box shape itself, now I can start changing the shape. So I'm going to just set the size to 2. Oh, and I want to make sure I'm keeping that active. And I'm just going to drag this over a little bit. And you can see the location here. And I'm just going to correct these numbers to whole numbers. So 1, 1, and in this case 1. And that gets me this front corner collider. I'm going to duplicate the collider, so just clicking on it in the scene tree, Command D to make a duplicate. Now I'm going to slide my duplicate back to the back corner, but I want to be careful because if I just resize the duplicate now, it's going to resize both of them. The size is linked for duplicates. So if I click on that little menu again, I can make my duplicate unique. So now any changes to the duplicate don't impact the original. Now I'm going to set my X value, I think, to 4, and then, wrong part of the widget there. Then I'm just going to slide the location close to where it needs to be and then correct the transform values. So in this case, X probably should be 0. Z should probably be -1, and Y should be +1. So now I have a perfectly fitting collider. Now it's possible that I'll come back and make changes to the collider later, but for now that looks pretty good. Now there's one last thing that I do want to do to my piece here before I move on to the same steps for my other pieces. So I'm going to come over to the Node tab and then the Groups section, and I'm just going to be creating, so the plus icon, a group to use for all my puzzle pieces. And I'm just going to call this pieces, and this is going to be for any of the pieces that are actually going to move. So I'm going to say okay. And you'll notice there's this little indicator here that lets us know the group, and when you hover over it, it shows you the name of the group. And this is going to let me treat my puzzle pieces differently than that frame piece later on. And at this point, I'm just going to save with Command S, and still the scene folder is fine. Again, I might do a little reorganization later, but for now this is good. And save. And I'm just going to repeat this step for any other models that are inside of my set. So Command N or File New to make a new scene, plus other node, and I want the animatable body 3D. I always want to make sure that I'm naming things descriptively. So when you save, it'll use the name that you give the parent. I'm gonna drag the model over the animatable body, sync to physics turned off, collision shape 3D. Again, the shape is going to be a box shape, and I'm going to work on setting the size. Now, in this case, I'm gonna have 3 collision shapes. I'm gonna duplicate with Command D. This first one that I duplicate doesn't need to be unique because it can be the exact same size. I just want to slide it over to the other side of the x-axis. And I want whole numbers. And when I duplicate the last time, I need to make sure that I do make this one unique. I do want to make sure that I've enabled the pieces group, then save. Command N to make a new scene, animatable body, dragging the last piece, collision shape 3D, that to a new box shape. All right, so with my root node, my animatable body 3D selected, physics is off, the pieces group. All right, so that is the basic setup. I'm just gonna save and then save my piece again. So I'm not gonna be going through and showing the colliders for and scenes for every single piece because the setup is really all the same. You have the animatable body 3D, you have the Blender file itself, you have whatever number of collision shape 3D. From here, I'm going to make my first script, and it's going to be one that's shared by all of my puzzle pieces. And I'm just going to get this created, and in the next video, I'll go over how to actually start making changes to the script itself. So with the root node selected, click on the little script icon to create a script. You'll notice there are a few different templates. I'm going to recommend that we just make an empty template. And you'll see it's inheriting from that animatable body 3D node. And I just need to choose a location and a name that this is going to go in. So I'm just going to click on the up arrow to get into my scripts folder. Now this is going to be for all of my puzzle pieces, not just the box piece. So I'm going to rename this to something that's more descriptive. And this is going to be the script that's going to let me select the puzzle pieces, move them around, and place them in the frame. So I'm going to call this move and set. And I'm just going to open that and create. So that gives me this empty script, and I can go back and forth between the different views over here. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. You can do Command plus and Command minus to zoom in and out, and that's the case for most programs on the Mac. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about what's going on here to start with. So when you have a script at the very top, when you're using GDScript, it's always going to be extending what they call a class. So a class is sometimes described like a template or perhaps a blueprint for building something. You can also think of it sort of as a collection of related capabilities that we have access to when the class is there. And so in this particular case, we're extending the animatable body 3D, so we're extending the class, we're giving access to the class and to everything inherited by the class. So this lets us use different capabilities of the animatable body 3D node. So sometimes it's helpful when you're working to add comments explaining what the different parts of your code are. And so you just add a hashtag and then whatever you want the comment to be. Now, something that is important to know, if you're ever changing the type of node, you do need to make sure that the connected script, you update the class to respond to that. All right, but that should be everything for today, and I'll be back with another video soon.